At 18 years of age, Shannon Charlton was sold to save her family from ruin. The transaction was dressed in silk and orange blossoms, sanctified in a chapel filled with pitying whispers. But Shannon knew the truth. She had been traded like livestock to settle debts her father's gambling had accumulated over 20 years. The buyer was Duke Morgan Williamson of Ravenshire, a man with mere months to live, according to every physician in London. Society called her a sacrificial bride, destined to become a wealthy widow before her 19th birthday. What they didn't know, what Shannon herself wouldn't discover until her wedding night, was that this dying man had been protecting her from the shadows since the day she was born, and that the greatest threat to her future wasn't his impending death, but the vultures circling his estate, waiting to claim everything he'd sworn to protect. The Duke's private study at his London residence was nothing like Maya had expected. There were no hunting trophies or portraits of stern ancestors glaring from gilded frames. Instead, the room was lined floor to ceiling with books, their spines worn from actual reading rather than decorative display. She recognized several titles as she entered: philosophical treatises, agricultural studies, even a collection of poetry that looked as though it had been handled with genuine affection rather than aristocratic obligation. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the Persian carpet, and through tall windows the grey morning light of London cast everything in shades of pewter and smoke. Maya had accepted his escort here under the pretense of discussing the marriage settlement. In truth, she had come for answers. "Why?" The word emerged more forcefully than she'd intended. She gripped the handle of her cane, standing despite the dull ache in her leg that always intensified when her emotions ran high. "You could have any woman in England, women who can dance, who can ride, who won't require a footman's assistance to navigate your estates, women whose presence will inspire pitying whispers at every social gathering you attend. So why choose the crippled spinster everyone pities?" Alexander poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter, the whiskey catching the firelight like liquid gold. He offered her one before settling into the leather chair opposite hers, crossing one leg over the other with the ease of a man completely comfortable in his own skin. His expression remained maddeningly calm, as though her question were the most reasonable thing in the world. "I have spent the last decade watching England's finest families parade their daughters before me like prize heifers at market. Beautiful girls, certainly, accomplished in watercolors and piano, able to recite French poetry and curtsy with exquisite grace. They can manage a tea service without spilling a drop and discuss the weather with charming animation." He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "But when I look into their eyes, Miss Lambert, I see nothing, no depth, no character forged by genuine hardship. They are porcelain dolls who will shatter the moment real life demands anything from them." "And you believe I won't shatter?" "I know you won't." He leaned forward, his grey eyes holding hers with unsettling intensity. The firelight threw the planes of his face into sharp relief, revealing a man who had also weathered storms she couldn't yet name. "You have survived 20 years of being dismissed, overlooked, and treated as an inconvenient footnote to your sister's successes. You have managed your father's household while he drank away his fortune, kept the creditors at bay through sheer force of will and careful accounting. You have endured physical pain that would reduce most of those simpering debutantes to hysterics, and you've done it without complaint, without demanding the world accommodate your suffering." His voice dropped lower, more intimate. "I don't need a wife who looks perfect on my arm, Miss Lambert. I need a partner who understands that survival requires steel beneath the silk. I need someone who won't crumble when faced with the realities of managing an empire." Maya felt something crack inside her carefully constructed walls of resignation, a fissure in the fortress she'd built around her heart. This is a business arrangement, then. It's an alliance, Alexander corrected, his voice carrying a weight that suggested he'd given this considerable thought, between two people the world has underestimated for far too long. The tea had gone cold in Shannon's cup, untouched, as Morgan carefully refolded her mother's letter and placed it in her trembling hands. A library fire crackled softly, the only sound besides Shannon's quiet weeping and the distant rumble of carriages passing on the street outside. "Keep it," Morgan said gently. "It belongs to you now, as does everything else I possess." Shannon looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes, struggling to reconcile this gentle, dying man with the monster she'd been prepared to endure. "I don't understand. You've sacrificed your final months, tied yourself legally to a stranger, all for a promise made to a woman who's been dead for 15 years? Your mother saved my life once," Morgan said, settling back in his chair with visible weariness. "Not dramatically, no drowning or runaway horses. She saved me from becoming the kind of cold, cynical man this world demands we become. She reminded me that kindness still mattered, that honor wasn't merely a word to be spoken at card tables and forgotten by morning." He gestured to the room around them, the thousands of books, the comfortable chairs, the life he'd built. "I have no heirs, Shannon, no family who deserve anything I've accumulated. My distant cousins are vultures who've been circling for years, waiting for me to die so they can divide the spoils. Your Aunt Agatha is cut from the same cloth. I've had investigators watching her for months. She intended to take a substantial finder's fee from Ashford for delivering you to him." Shannon's stomach turned. "I told me she was protecting me, that marriage to a duke, even a dying one, was better than becoming a governess or companion." "She was protecting her own interests," Morgan corrected, his voice hardening, "which is why our arrangement must be ironclad. I've had the marriage contracts drawn up to ensure that upon my death everything passes to you directly. No trusts controlled by male relatives, no guardianships, no legal loopholes. You will be a wealthy, independent widow with the power to tell every vulture in your family to go to hell." A laugh escaped Shannon's lips, unexpected and slightly hysterical. "You're giving me an empire just to spite my relatives?" "I'm giving you an empire," said Morgan, his blue eyes suddenly fierce despite his physical frailty, "because your mother asked me to give you freedom. And freedom, my dear Duchess, requires both money and power in quantities sufficient to terrify anyone who might wish to control you." He reached for a document on the side table, wincing slightly at the movement. "There's something else you should know. The physicians have given me 3 to 6 months, but I suspect the timeline is more generous than accurate. I've been managing my symptoms carefully to appear stronger than I am. The truth is, I may have weeks rather than months." Shannon's breath caught. Despite everything, despite having known this man for mere hours, the thought of losing him so soon felt like losing her mother all over again. "Which is why," Morgan continued, "we must move quickly. Your Aunt Agatha will not accept this arrangement quietly, neither will my cousins. They'll claim I was mentally incompetent, that you manipulated a dying man, that the marriage should be annulled. We need to prepare for war, Shannon, and I need to teach you how to fight it before I no longer can." The following morning, Shannon woke in a bedchamber so vast it could have contained her entire childhood home. Sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking Ravenshire's gardens, and for a disorienting moment she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back. The wedding, the library, Morgan's revelation. She was a duchess now, at least in name. A maid appeared with the information that His Grace requested her presence in his study at her convenience. Shannon dressed quickly, her heart hammering with uncertainty about what new revelations this day might bring. Morgan's study was smaller than the library, more intimate, lined with ledgers and maps rather than novels. He sat behind a massive desk, looking even more pale in the morning light, but his smile was genuine when she entered. "I thought you should see these," he said, gesturing to a stack of leather-bound account books spread across the desk. "Your education as a duchess begins with understanding exactly what you'll inherit and what I've been doing with it for the past 18 years. Shannon approached cautiously as Morgan opened the first ledger to a page marked with ribbon. "This is from 15 years ago, shortly after your mother's death, the first payment I made to your father's creditors, £500 to prevent him from losing your house." His finger traced down the entries. "Here, the next year, £800 when his gambling debts threatened to have him arrested, then £1,000 the year after that." Shannon's eyes widened as Morgan turned page after page, revealing an unbroken chain of payments stretching across nearly 2 decades. Debts settled, creditors paid off, quarterly allowances deposited into accounts her father believed were his own investments bearing fruit. "The governess who taught you French and music, I paid her salary directly, told her it was a grant from an educational charity. The physician who attended you when you had scarlet fever at age 12, I covered those bills. The dressmaker who provided your season wardrobe last year, that was me as well." Shannon sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "Everything? All of it?" "Every time your father's debts threatened to destroy your household or force him to marry you off to settle accounts, I intervened." He closed the ledger with a soft thud. "I've spent approximately £43,000 over 18 years keeping you safe, Shannon, not because I expected gratitude, but because I promised your mother I would ensure you had a childhood, an education, and a future." £43,000, Shannon whispered, the sum incomprehensible. "It's a fraction of what I possess," Morgan said quietly, "and it was the easiest promise I've ever kept. Watching you grow up from a distance, knowing you were safe and protected, has been the greatest honor of my life." Shannon looked at this dying man who had been her invisible guardian for 18 years. "My whole life has been a lie." "No, your whole life has been protected. There's a difference. You are exactly who you would have been regardless, intelligent, kind, resilient. I simply ensured you had the opportunity to become that person, rather than being crushed by your father's failures." Tears pricked Shannon's eyes again. "And now you're dying and I can do nothing to repay you." Morgan's expression softened with something that might have been paternal affection. "You've already repaid me, simply by becoming the extraordinary young woman your mother knew you would be. Though," he paused, a strange intensity entering his gaze, "there is one thing you could do for me if you're willing." "Anything," Shannon said without hesitation. "Fight for this," Morgan said, gesturing to the ledgers, the study, the empire he'd built. "When I'm gone, when the vultures descend, fight them with everything you have. Don't let them take what I've given you. Promise me that." Shannon stood, crossed to his desk, and placed her hand over his. "I promise."
Dr. Whitmore arrived on the 3rd day of Shannon's marriage, summoned by Morgan's persistent cough that had worsened overnight. Shannon waited in the drawing room while the examination took place, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. She had spent the past 2 days learning the household accounts, meeting the staff, and beginning to understand the vast responsibility Morgan would leave her. The thought of losing him so soon felt unbearable. When Dr. Whitmore finally emerged from Morgan's bedchamber, his expression was grave. He was a portly man with mutton-chop whiskers and an air of self-importance that immediately set Shannon's nerves on edge. "Your Grace," he said, bowing slightly, "I must be frank with you. His Grace's condition has deteriorated significantly. The consumption has progressed to his lungs with alarming speed. I give him 3 weeks at most, perhaps less if the hemorrhaging worsens." Shannon's breath caught. 3 weeks? But the other physicians said months. Other physicians were being optimistic to spare the Duke's feelings, Whitmore interrupted, his tone patronizing. I deal in facts, not false hope. His Grace should begin putting his affairs in order immediately. I've prescribed laudanum for the pain, and I'll return tomorrow to administer a stronger sedative to ease his final days. Something in the doctor's tone made Shannon's spine stiffen. Stronger sedative? To help him rest comfortably, Whitmore said smoothly. There's no point in prolonging his suffering when the outcome is inevitable. After the doctor departed, Shannon stood frozen in the drawing-room, her mind racing. She thought of Aunt Agatha's barely concealed eagerness at the wedding breakfast, her calculating eyes when she'd spoken of Shannon's impending widowhood. She thought of the suspicious speed with which Whitmore had condemned Morgan to mere weeks of life. On impulse, Shannon called for the housekeeper, Mrs. Fletcher, a stern woman who had served the Duke for 20 years. Mrs. Fletcher, how long has Dr. Whitmore been attending His Grace? Only since your engagement was announced, Your Grace, perhaps 6 weeks. His Grace's previous physician, Dr. Carstairs, retired rather suddenly. Suddenly? Mrs. Fletcher's expression tightened. There was some disagreement about treatment. Dr. Carstairs believed His Grace's condition could be managed with proper care and rest. Then your aunt sent Dr. Whitmore with a letter of introduction, claiming he was a specialist in consumption. His Grace was too ill to object, and Dr. Whitmore has been the attending physician since. Shannon's blood ran cold. Her aunt had replaced Morgan's trusted doctor with her own recommendation, and within weeks Morgan's prognosis had changed from manageable to terminal. Mrs. Fletcher, Shannon said quietly, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest, I want Dr. Carstairs brought back immediately, and I want every bottle of medicine Dr. Whitmore has prescribed brought to me before His Grace takes another dose. The housekeeper's eyes widened with understanding. You think— I think, Shannon interrupted, that my husband is being murdered, and I intend to stop it.
Dr. Carstairs arrived within hours, his weathered face creased with concern as Shannon met him in Morgan's study rather than the sick room. She had laid out every bottle, every vial, every powder that Dr. Whitmore had prescribed over the past 6 weeks across the desk like evidence at a trial. Your Grace, Carstairs said, his voice heavy with regret, I should never have allowed myself to be dismissed. His Grace was responding well to my treatments, building strength, gaining weight. Then that charlatan Whitmore arrived with his laudanum and sedatives, and within a fortnight the Duke could barely stand. Shannon's hands trembled as she pointed to a dark glass bottle. What is this? Carstairs uncorked it, sniffed, and his expression darkened. Laudanum mixed with something else, hemlock perhaps, or a heavy dose of mercury, enough to suppress the lungs, weaken the heart, given consistently over weeks. He set the bottle down carefully, as though it might explode. Your Grace, this isn't treatment, this is slow poison. The words hung in the air like a death sentence of their own. Shannon had suspected, but hearing it confirmed made her vision blur with rage. Can you save him? I can try, Carstairs said carefully, but the damage is extensive. His Grace needs more than I can provide. There's a physician in Paris, Dr. Laurent Beaumont, who has pioneered new treatments for lung diseases. Controversial methods, not accepted by the Royal College, but I've heard remarkable things. If anyone can reverse this damage, it's him. Then send for him, Shannon said immediately. Your Grace, the cost alone. I don't care about the cost. Send for him today. Use the fastest messenger. Offer him whatever fee he demands. Carstairs hesitated. There will be consequences. The medical establishment will view this as a rejection of English medicine. Your aunt and the Duke's cousins will claim you're wasting the estate on foreign quackery. Society will say you're a desperate girl, clinging to false hope. Shannon thought of Morgan's kindness, his 18 years of protection, the promise she'd made to fight for what he'd given her. She thought of her mother's letter and the love that had transcended death itself. "Let them say what they will," she said, her voice steady and cold as steel. "I am the Duchess of Ravenshire, and I will not stand by while my husband is murdered in his own home. Send for the French doctor, dismiss Dr. Whitmore permanently, and have the servants dispose of every medication he prescribed. If my aunt or anyone else objects, they can direct their complaints to me." Carstairs smiled, a genuine expression of respect. "Your mother would be very proud of you, Your Grace." "Then let's make sure the Duke lives long enough to know it," Shannon replied. Within 3 days, Dr. Laurent Beaumont arrived from Paris, a thin, intense man with sharp eyes and hands that moved with surgical precision. He examined Morgan for 2 hours while Shannon paced the corridor outside, her heart in her throat. When he finally emerged, his expression was grave but not hopeless. "The Duchess was correct to summon me," he said in accented English. "Another week of that poison and His Grace would be beyond saving. As it is, the damage is severe, but not irreversible. I can help him, madame, but the treatment will be difficult, painful, and society will call it barbaric." "I don't care what society calls it," Shannon said. "Can you save him?" Dr. Beaumont's smile was small but genuine. "Oui, madame. I believe I can." Lady Agatha arrived at Ravenshire House like a raven descending on a corpse, her black travelling dress and severe expression announcing her intentions before she'd even crossed the threshold. Shannon was in the morning room reviewing household accounts when the butler announced her aunt's arrival, his disapproval evident in the tightness around his mouth. "Show her in," Shannon said, setting down her pen and steeling herself for the confrontation she'd known was inevitable. Agatha swept into the room without waiting for invitation, her sharp eyes taking in Shannon's composed appearance with visible displeasure. "Shannon, I've come as soon as I heard about your reckless dismissal of Dr. Whitmore. The entire family is concerned about your judgment." "How kind of you to worry," Shannon replied, her tone pleasant but cold. "Though I'm surprised you traveled all this way. A letter would have sufficed." "A letter?" Agatha's laugh was harsh. "My dear girl, you've brought a foreign charlatan into this house and dismissed a respected English physician. The gossip is vicious. They're saying you've lost your senses, that grief has made you irrational before you've even properly become a widow." "Then they're saying precisely what you intended them to say, Aunt Agatha. Tell me, Aunt, how much did Dr. Whitmore pay you for the introduction, or was it a percentage of my eventual inheritance he promised once Morgan was dead?" Agatha's face flushed an ugly crimson. "How dare you accuse me of conspiring to murder my husband?" Dr. Shannon stood, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "Dr. Carstairs analyzed the medications Whitmore prescribed. Poison, Aunt Agatha. Slow, deliberate poison designed to look like natural progression of disease." "You have no proof," Agatha hissed, but her eyes betrayed her panic. "I have the bottles. I have Dr. Carstairs' written testimony, and I have already sent a report to the magistrate describing my suspicions." Shannon moved around the desk, standing toe-to-toe with the woman who had sold her like livestock. "You a stupid, ungrateful child. Do you think that dying man actually cares about you? You're a means to an end, a way to spite his family from beyond the grave. When he dies, and he will die, French doctor or not, his cousins will contest the will. They'll claim mental incompetence, undue influence. You'll be left with nothing, and your father's debts will bury what's left of your family's name." "Then I'll fight them," Shannon said quietly. "Just as I'm fighting you, just as I'll fight anyone who threatens what Morgan has given me." "You're a foolish girl playing at being a duchess," Agatha spat. "You have no allies, no experience, no understanding of how power actually works in this world. The moment that man draws his last breath, you'll be devoured." Shannon crossed to the bell pull and rang for the butler. "You're wrong, Aunt. I have something you'll never understand. I have a reason to fight that has nothing to do with money or status. I have loyalty to a man who showed me more kindness in 3 days than you showed me in 18 years. When the butler appeared, Shannon's voice was clear and commanding. "Lady Agatha is leaving. Ensure she's escorted from the property immediately. She is not to return under any circumstances." Agatha's eyes blazed with fury. "You'll regret this." "The only thing I regret," Shannon said, "is not seeing your true nature sooner. Goodbye, Aunt Agatha. I trust you can see yourself out." The morning after Agatha's departure, Shannon discovered just how deeply the poison had spread beyond Morgan's medicine bottles. She entered the servants' hall to find the staff divided into 2 distinct camps, those clustered around Mrs. Fletcher and those whispering in the corner with the Duke's valet, a nervous man named Pemberton who'd been with the household for less than a year. The conversation died the moment Shannon appeared, but the tension remained thick as smoke. "Mrs. Fletcher," Shannon said calmly, "I'd like to speak with the entire staff. Now, please." Within minutes, the household assembled in the great hall, footmen, maids, cook, stable hands, and gardeners. Shannon stood at the top of the stairs, acutely aware that she was an 18-year-old girl commanding people who'd been running this estate longer than she'd been alive. But she was also the Duchess, and Morgan's life depended on her ability to lead. "I know there have been rumors," Shannon began, her voice carrying across the hall. "Whispers about French doctors and dismissed physicians, concerns about my judgment, and fears about your futures. So let me be absolutely clear about what's happening in this house." She descended the stairs slowly, deliberately, meeting the eyes of each servant as she passed. "Dr. Whitmore was not treating His Grace. He was poisoning him. Dr. Carstairs has confirmed this, and the magistrate has been notified. Anyone who questions my decision to dismiss Whitmore is welcome to review the evidence themselves." A ripple of shock moved through the assembled staff. Pemberton's face went pale. "Furthermore," Shannon continued, "I'm aware that certain members of the Duke's extended family have been corresponding with members of this household, making promises about employment and generous severance should His Grace pass away under convenient circumstances." She stopped in front of Pemberton, who couldn't meet her eyes. "Mr. Pemberton, you received a letter from Lord Hartwell 3 days ago. Would you care to share its contents with the staff?" Pemberton's hands trembled. "Your Grace, you never intended to act on it," finished Shannon for him, "which is why you're still employed. But make no mistake, Lord Hartwell and his brothers are not your allies. They'll promise you the world to gain access to this house, and the moment His Grace is dead, they'll dismiss every one of you without a penny of the severance they promised." She turned to address the full assembly. "I, however, am offering you a choice. Stand with me, help me protect His Grace and this household, and I guarantee your positions and pensions, regardless of what happens. Or leave now with a month's wages and a clean reference. But if you stay and I discover you're working against this house, I will ensure you never work in service again." The silence was absolute. Then Mrs. Fletcher stepped forward. "I stand with Her Grace," she said firmly. The head gardener followed, then the cook, then one by one the rest of the staff. Only Pemberton remained frozen, torn between fear and greed. "Make your choice, Mr. Pemberton," Shannon said quietly. He looked at her, then at the assembled staff, then at the floor. I'll stay, Your Grace, and I'll stand with you." Shannon nodded. "Then burn Hartwell's letter and any others you've received. This household is no longer divided. We fight together or we fall separately, and I, for one, have no intention of falling." They came on a grey Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Dr. Beaumont had begun his treatments, A delegation of lawyers, physicians, and family members, led by Lord Hartwell and flanked by Aunt Agatha, who wore an expression of vindictive triumph. Shannon met them in the solarium, a glass-walled room overlooking the gardens where Morgan often took his afternoon rest. She had chosen the location deliberately, ensuring Morgan could hear everything from his adjacent bedchamber. "Your Grace," Lord Hartwell began with false courtesy, "we've come as concerned family to discuss His Grace's welfare and the rather alarming decisions being made on his behalf." Shannon remained standing while they arranged themselves on chairs like a tribunal. She wore a gown of deep burgundy, the Ravenshire diamonds at her throat, every inch the Duchess, despite her 18 years. "His Grace's welfare is my concern, not yours, Lord Hartwell," Shannon said evenly. "As his wife and legal representative during his illness, all decisions regarding his care fall under my authority." "That's precisely what we are here to contest," interjected Dr. Marchand, a pompous physician Shannon recognized from the Royal College. "The Duke's condition has been grossly mismanaged. This French charlatan you've installed has subjected His Grace to barbaric treatments, bloodletting, purgatives, experimental herbs. We have testimony from Dr. Whitmore that His Grace was comfortable and peaceful under proper English care until you dismissed him." "Dr. Whitmore was administering poison," Shannon said flatly. "Dr. Carstairs has documented evidence, which I have submitted to the magistrate. If you'd like to continue defending Whitmore's treatment, I suggest you hire a barrister for the criminal proceedings." Agatha leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malice. "The girl is delusional. She's been under tremendous stress, married to a dying man, isolated in this vast house. It's no wonder she's seeing conspiracies where none exist. For her own protection and His Grace's, we're petitioning to have a proper guardian appointed." "A guardian?" Shannon's voice remained calm, but her hands clenched behind her back. "I am the Duchess of Ravenshire. I need no guardian." "You're a child," Hartwell said bluntly, 18 years old, with no experience managing an estate of this magnitude. We're proposing that His Grace be moved to a private sanitarium where he can receive proper care, and that the estate be placed under temporary conservatorship until his death, at which point you'll contest the will and divide his fortune among yourselves," Shannon interrupted. "Let me save you the trouble of pretense, Lord Hartwell. You don't care about Morgan's welfare. You want him declared incompetent so you can seize control before he dies, and you want me removed so there's no one to stop you." "This is precisely the kind of irrational accusation that proves our point," Dr. Marchand said, exchanging glances with the lawyers. "Your Grace, we have a petition here signed by 3 physicians and 4 family members requesting that the Duke be evaluated for competency and that you be relieved of decision-making authority for his medical care." Shannon felt ice crystallize in her veins. They had come prepared, armed with legal documents and medical testimony. This wasn't a consultation, it was an ambush. "The Duke," she said carefully, "is perfectly capable of speaking for himself." "His judgment is compromised by illness and laudanum," Agatha said. "Everyone knows dying men will agree to anything their young wives suggest. It's our duty to protect him from manipulation." "Then let's ask him," Shannon moved to the door of Morgan's bedchamber. "Since you're so concerned about his competency, surely you'll respect his own wishes?" She opened the door before they could object. Morgan stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on his cane, but upright, more upright than he'd been in months. Dr. Beaumont's treatments were working, slowly but unmistakably. His color had improved, his breathing steadier. He looked like a man fighting his way back from death's door, not a man requiring institutionalization. "Lord Hartwell," Morgan said, his voice weak but clear. "How kind of you to visit, though I'm afraid your petition is worthless. My wife has my complete confidence and my full legal authority. The will is ironclad, the marriage legitimate, and I am, as you can see, still very much in possession of my faculties." "Your Grace, you don't understand what she's done." "I understand perfectly. She saved my life. Now get out of my house."
Spring arrived at Ravenshire with an explosion of cherry blossoms in the garden, and for the first time in months Morgan walked among them without his cane. Shannon watched from the terrace as he moved slowly but steadily along the gravel paths, Dr. Beaumont following at a discreet distance. The transformation over the past 8 weeks had been nothing short of miraculous. "He improves daily," Beaumont said, joining Shannon on the terrace with his ever-present medical journal. "The lungs are clearing, the color returns. Another month, perhaps 2, and he will be as strong as a man of his age should be." He paused, his sharp eyes studying Shannon. "You saved his life, Your Grace, not me, you." Shannon shook her head. "You provided the treatment." "But you provided the will to fight," Beaumont corrected. "Most young women in your position would have simply waited for the inheritance. You chose differently. C'est remarquable." After the doctor departed for his afternoon walk, Shannon descended to the garden. Morgan stood beside the fountain, his face tilted toward the sun, looking more alive than she'd ever seen him. When he heard her approach, he turned with a smile that made her heart stumble. "I was beginning to think I'd dreamed this," he said quietly. "Spring, warmth, the smell of growing things. I'd resigned myself to dying in winter." "You're not dying," Shannon said, stopping beside him. "Dr. Beaumont says—" "I know what he says." Morgan reached out and took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them over the weeks of his recovery. "But I'm not speaking of medical prognoses, Shannon. I'm speaking of miracles, of second chances I never expected to receive." His thumb traced circles on her palm, and Shannon felt heat rise in her cheeks. Over the past 2 months, their relationship had shifted from guardian and ward to something far more complex. Late-night conversations in the library, shared laughter over breakfast, the quiet intimacy of her reading to him during his worst days. She had fallen in love with him without realizing it was happening. "Shannon," Morgan said, and something in his tone made her look up. His blue eyes held an intensity that stole her breath. "When I married you, I told you that you were my ward, not my wife, that I was protecting you, not claiming you. But I find myself hoping—" He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "I find myself hoping that perhaps, when I'm fully recovered, you might consider allowing this marriage to become something real." Shannon's heart hammered against her ribs. "Real?" "I'm falling in love with you," Morgan said simply. "I don't know when it happened. Perhaps it was watching you command my household like a general marshalling troops, or seeing you face down Hartwell without flinching, or maybe it was simply the way you look when you're concentrating on account books." His smile was self-deprecating. "I'm a man of 36 who nearly died, and you're a young woman with her whole life ahead of you. You deserve someone young and strong and—" Shannon stepped forward and kissed him, silencing his doubts with the simplest answer she could give. His arms came around her tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I'm falling in love with you, too," Shannon whispered against his chest. "I think I have been since the night you showed me my mother's letter." Morgan pulled back slightly to look at her face, his expression wonder and joy mixed with lingering disbelief. "Are you certain? Because once I claim you properly as my wife, Shannon, I won't let you go. I'll be that selfish." "Then be selfish," Shannon said, rising on her toes to kiss him again, "because I have no intention of going anywhere." They stood together in the garden as spring bloomed around them, 2 people who had found each other through tragedy and chosen love despite every reason to simply accept duty. Morgan was still weak, Shannon was still learning to be a duchess, and the vultures still circled at the edges of their happiness. But for this moment, in the sunshine and cherry blossoms, they had won.
The Ravenshire Ball was the event of the London season, and the Ton had accepted their invitations with morbid curiosity. Rumour held that the young Duchess was finally hosting a proper society event after months of isolation, perhaps signalling the Duke's imminent death and her emergence as a wealthy widow. Lady Pemberton had even worn half-mourning in anticipation. What greeted them instead was a tableau that would be discussed in drawing-rooms for years to come. Duke Morgan Williamson stood at the top of the grand staircase in full evening dress, his posture straight, his colour healthy, his hand resting not on a cane, but on the arm of his wife. Shannon wore a gown of midnight blue silk, with the Ravenshire sapphires glittering at her throat and wrists. Not the uncertain girl who'd been married 6 months ago, but a woman who had fought death itself and won. The ballroom fell into shocked silence as they descended together. "Good God," someone whispered, "he's alive!" "More than alive," another voice added with something like awe. "He looks healthier than he did 5 years ago." Morgan led Shannon directly to the center of the ballroom floor, and the orchestra, reading the moment perfectly, began a waltz. As they moved together, his steps sure, her movements graceful, the crowd parted like witnesses to a resurrection. "They're staring," Shannon murmured, though her smile never faltered. "Let them," Morgan replied, his eyes holding hers with an intimacy that made several matrons fan themselves vigorously. "Let them see what they thought impossible. Let them see what happens when someone refuses to accept the world's verdict." Across the ballroom, Aunt Agatha stood frozen in horrified disbelief, while Lord Hartwell had already begun edging toward the exit. The petition to have Morgan declared incompetent had been dismissed 3 months ago, and Dr. Whitmore had quietly fled to the continent to avoid prosecution. Every vulture who'd circled Ravenshire had been routed. As the waltz ended, Morgan lifted Shannon's hand to his lips in a gesture of such genuine devotion that the room erupted in applause. Not the polite, obligatory applause of social duty, but real appreciation for a love story that had defied every expectation. "Do you regret it?" Shannon asked quietly as they left the floor, "being tied to me when you could have had anyone?" Morgan pulled her closer, his voice warm against her ear. "I was dying alone, surrounded by fortune, but empty of purpose. You gave me a reason to fight. You gave me life, Shannon. How could I possibly regret that?" Later that evening, as the ball continued around them, they slipped away to the terrace where spring flowers bloomed in the moonlight. Morgan drew Shannon into his arms, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart, a heart that had nearly stopped, that she had fought to save, that now beat in rhythm with her own. 6 months ago, Morgan said quietly, I was preparing to die. I'd made peace with it, had arranged everything so you'd be safe after I was gone. I thought the greatest gift I could give you was freedom. And now, Shannon asked, looking up at him, now I know the greatest gift we can give each other is choice. His hand cupped her face with infinite tenderness. You chose to fight for me when the world said I wasn't worth saving. I choose to love you not because of duty or debt, but because you're the most extraordinary person I've ever known. We saved each other, Shannon said simply. Inside, the ballroom glittered with candlelight and the ton's finest, but out here in the moonlight, the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshire held each other close, two souls who had found love in the most unlikely of circumstances, who had fought death and greed and society's cruel judgment, and who had emerged not as a dying man and his sacrificial bride, but as partners in every sense that mattered. The widow-in-waiting had become a warrior, the dying duke had been reborn, and together they had rewritten the ending that everyone had predicted for them. As Morgan kissed her beneath the stars, Shannon thought of her mother's letter, the promise made 20 years ago, and the chain of love that had brought them to this moment. Elizabeth Charlton had asked Morgan to ensure her daughter's happiness, and he had done more than that. He had given Shannon a reason to discover her own strength, and in return, she had given him a reason to live.